All right, we are live. Hello, Montessorians, and welcome to another live coaching call. I am Deneen, I'm the community manager here, and we have the lovely Britt Hawthorne with us today. We're going to talk about some really neat things. Thank you, Britt, so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here with us.
Yeah, no, I am honored. Welcome, everybody. I am just so honored to be here. I can't wait to share my experience and knowledge with you, and I hope that you'll also share your experience and knowledge with me, too.
Right. Yeah, and we've got a good crew here as well. We've got 5 people, so just chat in if you have any questions. I know we've got, some from Florida and Texas, and we've got a couple of people in Post Oak, and I'm just excited to have in North Carolina as well. Such a good group here. Awesome. So, Britt, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you because you have so much history and so much background, and I think all of us need to hear about it because, when we're really passionate about what we do, I think it's important to remember, where we also came from. So Britt Hawthorne is a nationally recognized equity trainer in education. She partners with action-oriented educators across the United States, creating classroom environments that are inclusive and equitable for all learners. Your work, Britt, seeks to move justice from being an idea to an authentic culture. Awesome. You graduated from Rockford University, where you studied elementary ed. You're my elementary buddy, with an emphasis in English as a second language. You went on to earn your AMS Lower L certificate from the Midwest Montessori Teaching Center and an upper elementary Montessori certification from Houston Montessori School. And you're coming out of Houston right now, so
I am.
Got some roots there. Britt is the co-founder of Integrating Montessori, what a great name, an online continuing professional development collective for Montessori educators, deeply committed to preparing the environment where every child can reach their fullest potential. When Britt is not presenting workshops like this one, she's homeschooling her 2 children with her partner, Shane. Awesome. Whew. Britt, I'm so excited to have you here.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you're a fellow Montessorian. You've been in the classroom. How long were you in the classroom for?
Mm-hmm. I was a lead teacher for 5 years. And so I taught the spectrum of 1st through 6th grade as a lead.
Perfect. And so what inspired you to move into the role of equity trainer?
Yes, it actually, so I found Montessori through my children, as many of us do. And it's interesting. So I was already in education before I came to Montessori. But I was in traditional education from my elementary ed background, and then fell in love with this thing called Montessori and trying to figure it out. I applied for a position at a Montessori school, got the position, thankfully, and went off to training. Fell deeply in love with the Montessori method, the pedagogy, the philosophy, and really became committed, and I could never see myself teaching anything other than Montessori. Not only is it the way that I teach in the classroom, but it's become a way of life for us. We moved to Houston, Texas. We were looking for a diverse community to raise our 2 children in. And so Houston popped up, and we visited the city. We fell in love, and we moved cross country from Illinois to Texas. And again, I'm teaching upper L. And what I was noticing is that Montessori looks different depending on where we're teaching. And it also looks different depending on who we are teaching. And that's something that I guess I never really reckoned with myself, is that even though I had this very idea that I see all children as the same, all children weren't being treated the same. And so we experienced that as parents. We experienced that saying that Montessori is for every child, but not for every family. And that was weaponized against us. That maybe for our youngest, Montessori wasn't a great fit. So we made the radical and hard choice to leave the classroom and homeschool our children. Mm-hmm. But I knew that there were other Montessori educators that were equally committed to equity, just like I was. But we were all looking for how to do it. This was not addressed in my elementary education program. This also wasn't addressed in my Montessori teaching ed program. This is just something that's not addressed. And so there's more educators than not that are looking for resources. And so I'm really trying to build a collective, a coalition of folks that say, hey, this is what I'm doing, what do you think? And that we can learn from each other. But also, I'm looking really to say, what does it mean when Dr. Montessori says that we have to prepare our spirit? What does it mean when she says we have to tear out our deeply rooted defects? What does that mean when we have to think about the ways we've been conditioned to think of a certain group of people? And so I'm on that spiritual preparation, that never-ending journey as well. And so that's what I do now. And now I just travel the country. I work with really anyone who will have me. But I work with classroom teachers that are saying, this is a group of learners I have in my classroom that I know that I'm not meeting their needs and I want to. So will you help me?
Right. Oh, what a neat journey. And you're very early in your journey, right? You've done this for 2 years, but I imagine those 2 years have been incredibly powerful, and you've probably learned so much on your journey so far.
Oh, yes. There's things that now that I said in the beginning that now I say, ooh, I changed my mind. I've spent more time analyzing. I realized that there's not a one size fits all. Every single school community looks different because we all represent different human beings within that school community. So my solutions are varied. The history of the city, I've realized that depending on what's the history of the residential community will also depend on what's our solutions for today. So it's been a wonderful journey, and I just love linking arms with educators wanting to move forward.
Right, absolutely. And I remember, from our early conversations, we were trying to hone in, right? Because this idea of diversity and inclusion is so broad. And I imagine you go through a similar process when you work with specific schools or specific individuals. But what we're going to hone in on today is the socioeconomic diversity. Because oftentimes, and especially with our membership, we have a lot of private schools that are tuition based, and they have they have some ideas of how to do fundraising or how to offer scholarships, but it's really challenging. And the need to diversify that socioeconomic base is there, and we just don't have the answers yet. So I'm excited to have you talk about preparing and supporting socioeconomic diversity within your school population.
Yes, I'm super excited. And you're right. That's one thing, Arleon, I remember when you had reached out and said, hey, we want to host this workshop. And I'm like, I'm so excited, but let's drill down that word diversity, because oftentimes diversity might be racial and ethnic diversity. It could be socioeconomic diversity. It could be religious diversity, language diversity. And so getting really clear with the language that we're using, having that precision of language, so that we're making sure that we're creating an inclusive environment for who we mean to create an inclusive environment for. And so I have on this slide here, y'all, if you need to connect with me, I have ways that you can connect with me. I'm really big on social media, so you can connect with me on Instagram or Twitter. But if you need to contact me directly, go ahead and just shoot me an email. And so you can shoot me an email directly, or if you need to find more information about my work, I put my website right there for y'all.
Perfect. Next.
Okay, so as Montessorians, we love some good old quotes. And so this is one quote for me that really grounds the work and what I do. It has the word not only peace, but it also has some other words that really resonate with me. If there's a word or phrase that resonates with you, you can go ahead and put it in the chat box. For me, if I was using the chat box, the word that resonates for me is going to be peace, social world, and child.
Mm-hmm.
When you're ready, you can go to the next slide.
Yeah. This is such a good quote. And I imagine it was Maria Montessori, yes?
Yes.
Just making sure.
All right, so one of the identities that I'm deeply concerned about is our poor people. And I know that even when I use that word poor people, for some of us, it may even kind of hit us in the gut because we have such emotional connotation with that word poor. And so I define poor as any family struggling to pay the necessary bills to live. With this definition, not only does it include the 40 million people who do live in poverty in the United States, according to the census, but it also includes our shrinking middle class that are struggling to pay their necessary bills It could be their medical bills, maybe funeral costs, or even car maintenance just to get from A to B. And so it's really important for your community to define, when we think of socioeconomic diversity, get really comfortable with who you are trying to work with, and then also defining what does that mean. For some school communities, that's going to mean looking just straight from the census saying this is our target group. For other school communities, it might be broadening your definition and also being really realistic with who you can help and the resources that you have. There's no shame in saying we're unable to help this group of people, and we acknowledge that. And that if we do attempt to help this group of people, we may end up doing more harm than good. But there's a group of people that you know that you can help. And so that's why it's really important just to get clear right away. And so throughout this webinar, you'll hear me use the word poor. And I just mean anyone who's struggling to pay their necessary bills, and they just do not have disposable income left over. Mm-hmm. All right, so this is an identity I'm deeply concerned about for a number of reasons. One, it's often an invisible, marginalized identity, meaning we can't see it. It's different than gender or race and ethnicity. It's different than language, something that we can hear. It's something that oftentimes we can't see, and our families are working, our poor families are working extremely hard to show you that they're not poor. And that's something to always keep in the forefront of our minds. They're usually working to try to stay invisible. And that's because we have such guilt and shame around the ideas of poorness. And I want to make sure that we know that it's not poor people's fault that they're poor. It's a result of economic policies that benefit some while suppressing or oppressing another group of people. And so once we can start to say, hey, we have, there's a recent data that came out that said, now there's no place in the United States, no county or city, where if you're working a minimum wage job full time, that you'll be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. So we now are living in a time where the minimum wage is no longer the idea minimum wage of what it was originally created to be, saying that this is the minimum amount so that you can live off of, right? And that's why there's this language, the difference between a minimum wage and a living wage, because right now it's not a livable wage. So it's important for us to ask, well, how can we support the poor working class? Again, this webinar is working around the idea of targeting the poor working class. That might mean the middle class. Some folks identify themselves as a middle class, but they still don't have the disposable income to help with tuition or enough to help with tuition. This webinar is not going to address the deepest of the poor people, and those are the ones like our unhoused siblings or even in transitional housing. So this webinar is going to be for people who are working and they have some amount of disposable income, but maybe not enough to pay for a full tuition, or maybe not enough to pay for tuition at all, but they're paying their necessary bills.
Thank you for that clarification too, because I think when this topic comes up, it's really difficult to dive into because you don't know where to start. And just like, Dr. Montessori said it, the language, the nomenclature is so important to be able, it's the key to understanding. And so just even clarifying what it is that you're targeting and how you're doing that is key. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And so I know that many of you already know the benefits of having socioeconomic diversity. And for those of you that have a socioeconomic integration program that's already happening, you see the benefits. Here are some, and unfortunately, I think it cut off the bottom of my slide, but we're going to share this PowerPoint with y'all, and you'll be able to click on where I found the statistics, and it lists several more as well. But here are just some of the benefits of having socioeconomic diversity. And for me, it's learning in integrated settings can enhance students' leadership skills. And if that's not Montessori, I'm not quite for sure what it is. And even the second one, integrated classrooms encourage critical thinking, problem solving, and creativity. And that's because we know that people from different backgrounds are coming with different experiences. different knowledge, skill sets, gifts, talents. And so when we get those learners together and when we get the families together, beautiful things do happen. And so there's some more there. And then once you click on that, there's even more that you can provide. You can do your own research and you can provide your school community.
Sure. So are you not able to see the other 3 bullet points?
I'm not.
Shoot. Do you want me to read them for you?
Yeah. Do you mind?
Yeah, not at all. Children who attended integrated schools had higher earnings as adults, had improved health outcomes, and were less likely to be incarcerated. Attending a diverse school can help reduce a racial bias and counter stereotypes. Students who attend integrated schools are more likely to seek out integrated settings later in life. Absolutely.
Yep.
I love
Yep.
that.
And these and knowing these benefits, it's one of the reasons why I grew up in Illinois, not too far from Chicago, and it was a pretty segregated city. And we really only had 2 main racial groups. We had white and black, and we had a river that divided the 2 groups. And so we knew the benefits of diversity, not just racial and ethnic diversity, but socioeconomic diversity. And it was one of the reasons that we knew it was so powerful that we said, we're going to move. And that's why we chose Houston. We Googled most diverse cities in the United States, and Houston came up as one of, if not the most diverse city in the United States. And we said, we're moving there because it's so important for us. These are the things that we want for our children. And this is the world that we want to create and we want to be a part of. So I also want to let y'all know that building the diversity you seek in a community is only a part of the goal, though. It is equally important to create a community of inclusion. And so you'll hear me use the word interchangeably, socioeconomic diversity and also socioeconomic integration. Okay, so when we think of diversity, it's literally just a numerical idea. It's what we can see, what we can quantify or represent. But we so often know in education where we miss the mark, especially in the larger conversation of education, is we get too much about the numbers and we forget that there's a humanity involved. And so having socioeconomic integration allows us to really humanize and see that humanity. We're really looking for integration. We don't want to just get people who look different or have different incomes together. We want there to be a sense of belonging. We want people to feel welcomed. We want to create a true community. And so it's equally important to make sure that you have that inclusion, that sense of belonging, so that the value of diversity building it will be fully recognized for individual students and for the school at large. There's something from the National Association of Independent Schools, and it stuck out to me when I was doing my research for this webinar. It says a critical first step in creating socioeconomic diversity is believing that it's necessary and that it matters. And in January 2018, a Harvard economics professor, Raj Chetty, demonstrates, among other things, that a white child born in the lowest income quintile in the United States has just a 7.5% chance to reach the top income quintile by adulthood. Now, that's different in Canada. The likelihood is 13.5%, so almost double. That's oftentimes a misconception we have about America and the American dream, and if you work hard enough, you'll be able to change the trajectory. But what's also really important is to know that for African American children, this likelihood is a mere 3%. And I'm adding to that also that know that that's not because there's something innately wrong with Black and African American people, but it has to do with centuries of racist policies that have suppressed the access of wealth, really starting with the 150 years of chattel slavery that made it illegal to own land and to earn income. And then moving into the Jim Crow, redlining and housing discrimination. We actually live across the street. There's a neighborhood here in Houston. And in that neighborhood, it was created out of the GI Bill. And so it gave veterans plots, and they could build homes. And these homes are beautiful, beautiful homes. And many of them go for $400,000, $500,000, sometimes $1 million, just across the street. But it's interesting because it's also what's called a deed restricted neighborhood, meaning that they have some really strict rules and regulations about the neighborhood. And that's one of the things that makes the neighborhood really desirable. But one of the rules on the deed was that Black and African-American families could not live in that neighborhood. And that rule was actually not removed until 2002.
Wow.
So these are they're still very recent laws and rules and policies that that are already on the books, and it takes a coalition of people to change that. But this is why I wanted to share that information with you, because Chetty's research has an upside to it. And that's what this is. Research shows that among the things that matter most for improving those odds are a good kindergarten teacher. So Montessorians, we know that that's Children's House, a college education, and going to college soon after high school. So those are things that we as educators can directly change the trajectory of a child, of a family's life, and ultimately our society. So as schools expand their socioeconomic diversity from their student bodies, the foundation for success for their low and middle income students will impact the odds for upward mobility in profound ways that can't even be measured. So I think while sometimes that data, that awareness feels heavy, the action that we have the ability to change, we have power and control, should make us feel good, especially those that are change makers and that are able to change it. So there's those several benefits I've named also on that slide, but I want to go into now, let's discuss how we're going to make this an actual priority, some things we can think about. And again, if y'all have questions, comments, concerns, requests, put them in that chat box, and I'm going to be checking in on that chat box as we go through this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to stay on this slide, preparing the environment?
Perfect. Yep. So preparing the environment, I have 8 things that we can get going. Now, some of y'all are already doing this really well. And if you are, great. I want you to share about that in the chat box so we know that there's an expert in our community that we can connect with. We can say, will you help me? If you see that there's a vulnerability or a weakness, sometimes people call it a delta, then you can put that in the chat box and we can connect you. I'm a support for you. And someone else in this community I know is doing this right. And they have a plan that we can follow. There's a framework there. So by no means is this an exhaustive list. I don't want anyone to feel contained by the list. Add what you would want, even if you want to put in the chat box. These are things that I think are a priority, and start where it feels good for you. So number one, we have to make a plan about how we're going to talk about this. There's an organization called the Opportunity Agenda, and I really enjoy this organization and the resources that they share. They're actually for media. It's a media resource for people who are social justice minded with their language. They're trying to be socially just, and it allows us to have that precision of language. And so for you, if you're a little bit uncomfortable about what to say, what to call it, what to do, head over to the Opportunity Agenda, and they have great ways for us to redefine and reframe so that we are making sure that we're always humanizing the individual and we're always blaming the system, right? It's going to be the difference between system blaming and person blaming. It's not going to do us any good for us to blame the individual, the family and the parents, and then think that they're going to feel welcomed in our environment. And they also say this, which really stuck with me, that they believe, and I do too, that poverty is not inevitable. Poverty is the result of deliberate policies that benefit some over others, and that we can achieve true economic abundance among us all. So when we start to have that mindset and say, yes, we can achieve this, and education, a lot of times folks will say education is the great equalizer, we can make that happen. So it's really important to have a framework when thinking about economic integration in your community. When you're speaking about it as a leadership team, when you start to create a committee and having a diverse committee made up of your teachers, your staff, your parents, community members, making sure that everyone knows that we can move forward together because we're stronger together, that the effects of our economy are a result of benefit or a result of policies, and that we can also create policies that are going to benefit all, and that we all have a responsibility to address systemic injustice. And that's what Dr. Maria Montessori, if we think about that framework, that's really Dr. Maria Montessori's framework, that we must move forward together, that our educational policies can and will benefit all, and that we do have a responsibility to address systemic injustice. Those are the three things that she fulfilled within her lifetime, and that she has asked us to pick up the torch and carry it and fulfill within our lifetime as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so number one I have on there is create an SES integration committee. Let's chat really quick about what is that and what does it look like. I saw in the comment box real quick, though, I'll interrupt. Kelly said, what was the name of that organization again? Oh, you got it, the Opportunity Agenda. Okay, so your SES integration committee, number one, it needs to be a committee that's solely dedicated to the integration of SES. Otherwise, it gets lost. Y'all, we are extremely productive human beings, especially being the head of a school on the leadership team. It can get lost in all of the other things that are on your plate that is just equally as important. So create a specific committee. Make sure your committee is diverse, representing yourself or maybe another person on your leadership team. Making sure it also represents your lead guides, assistants, support staff, making sure that it's open and welcome. Your parents, your families should also be represented on this committee, especially the people that you are intending to serve. Their voice should count for almost twice because they are going to have the experience and knowledge. So create a committee, put it out there in your community and say, this is something that we are committed to. We are developing. Go slow, y'all. There's this an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. So go together, go slow, take your time. So maybe just year one or the first 6 months, you're going to develop a committee. And then it goes into number two, start creating action-oriented statements. An action-oriented statement can just begin with, we want our school to live up to these values. And then just start listing we want. We want socioeconomic diversity. We want socioeconomic integration. We want every student to thrive in our school regardless of their parents' income. So those are just some examples, but have everyone come with one thing that they want, and you can come up with 10 action-oriented statements. Okay. Always keep in the back of your mind that you're always thinking about full and equal opportunity. And I say that because talent is spread throughout. Opportunity is not always spread throughout. So always think about full and equal opportunity. Moving into the next one, then develop a straightforward plan for attracting new learners and attaining funding. I think number three is the hardest one. So take your time with it. Build an awareness of what you are doing. You can also do a Google search of socioeconomic integration policies. And there's several articles with other schools. Right now, there's about, I think, 80 to 100 schools that have created and made public a framework that they're using for socioeconomic integration. And that makes up schools of public, charter, private, independent schools that have all created plans and have made those public. So do a quick Google search and look to see what's already out there and what's working. So think about attracting new learners. Again, make sure you're really specific with who you're trying to attract. It's not enough saying that, oh, we want SES diversity. I don't think you do. in the back of your mind, there's really a target audience you're looking for. Be honest with yourself. And once you become really honest, you're going to start to attract those learners and those families. Then that goes into funding. You can be really honest with funders. You can also become really clear about saying, here are the resources that we have. Here are the resources that we're going to need to support. If you're targeting learners, let's say, that are in transitional housing or that are completely unhoused, funding is going to look very different, because you might then have to look for funding for transportation. You might have to look for funding for food. You might have to look for funding for uniforms, medical, vaccinations. The gamut becomes bigger and broader. You may say we have the resources to do that. You may also say we don't have the resources to do that. You might say that we only have the resources to support tuition. So then you know that that's not your target audience. Maybe middle income families that have limited disposable income is going to be your target audience. Maybe it's that you can offset fees, books, uniforms, supplies. Maybe your school doesn't have uniforms. Maybe your school is part of a farm to table program that you received a grant for. So maybe lunch and meals are already taken care of, right? Every school is completely different. So you have to get really clear with what resources you have and what resources you'll need. Make sure that you're co-constructing that approach between everyone involved, thinking explicitly, naming it explicitly, who you're trying to serve with your economic justice plan. Research says, we've already talked about the benefits that socioeconomic diversity and integration has on everyone. Okay, there's benefits even for your middle, for your over-resourced families, your wealthy families. There's benefits that are going to decrease their stereotypes, their the bias, the prejudice. So it's going to benefit everyone. However, your program must make sure they're aligned to effectively teaching who you're trying to target. So maybe it's going to be English language learners. Kelly, you're starting a dual language program. So maybe for you, it's English language learners or already existing bilingual families. Maybe it's going to be Black and African Americans. Maybe it's Latinx, Hispanic, Asian Pacific Islanders. Think just really specific too. It's not just about SES diversity. We go back to our research from the Harvard professor, Professor Chetty. Notice how poorness affects families differently depending on their race. So in the United States, we always have that undercurrent of race that's going to disproportionately affect families of color. So you have to get really clear with that too. How are we going to create an inclusive environment once we bring the families here? How do we make sure that they feel equally as important and a part of this community as well? Then decide what successful SES integration is for your school, and then commit to that. So at this point, we still haven't brought in anyone yet. We haven't given out any scholarships or any grants. We haven't done a sliding scale just yet. Hi, Butter. Butter, go lay down. Go lay down. Thank you. Yep, lay down. So at this point, we haven't brought any families in yet. We're still creating this framework and this plan. At this point, we're going to see what is successful SES integration for us. School leadership here is key. It's really important that a part of your SES success plan, there's always this ongoing modeling that's happening and your implementation practices that are happening too. For some schools, it's going to be the number of scholarships you're able to give out. I really want everyone just to pause and think about that. It's so much more than that. Because if one school is saying, well, we can give out 57 scholarships, or we're able to give out this amount of money, but then those families aren't staying with you through the full cycle, and as Montessorians, we know how important that full cycle is, then we've missed the mark. For me, success is going to look like families being able to stay with us through a full cycle. So thinking about scholarships, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but thinking about multi-year scholarships. For me, that's going to be more successful than saying we were able to give a family a scholarship one year, but then funding was cut short. And so while we said they had a spot, the burden now fell on the family. Mm-hmm. So think about how you can offer a full wraparound scholarship. The point should be sustaining a relationship more than putting a number down on a website saying, this is how many scholarships we gave out this year, or this was the dollar amount that we gave out. So just think about really what would success feel like for you if you were in their shoes and having that empathy.
And I know, Britt, that's a really big one for many schools that have a scholarship program is how do you not do it year by year? Because our budget's year by year, and you know, enrollment is varying depending on the year. So do you have any specific thoughts on how to do a multi-year scholarship? Any tips?
Yeah, there's some schools that I've worked with that have multi-year scholarships, and what they do is they set up a private funding source. So one school in particular has one fundraiser that all of the money goes solely to their scholarship funds, no matter what. So they actually had to extend creating or building their playground by 2 years. And I know that it made some families upset because they're saying, hey, there's this money in this scholarship fund, we can dip into it. And again, that school leadership said, no, this money is there. It's an account that's held through their PTO. So it's held in their PTO account instead of in their school business account. And it has someone's name on it for 6 years. That is their money. It's already been assigned to it. So one thing you can do is start by doing your gala, or some schools will do like a fill the bus. It could be an ice cream social. It can be something that you get all the families involved with too. I love when there's the school, what do you call the bake sale? When you do bake sale and everyone is vested, the families are invested, the learners are vested, learners are making the baked goods in their Montessori classroom, and everyone is saying this money is going to go into this pot because we all believe in it. There's other ways that people do it as well. There's sliding scales, and there's a way to do an equitable sliding scale. And Rebecca Santander out of Wildflower Schools in North Carolina, she has an equitable sliding scale model that I can always connect you with her. But it's this idea, and you have to have a really big buy-in from your families, but it's this idea that your families that are over-resourced are able to offset tuition for families that are under-resourced. Those work best when it's a really small community. If you have a large community, I'm going to say any more than 100 students, it becomes nearly impossible. You have to have a really tight-knit small community, and you have to have already done a lot of work around the history of race and racism, the history of the middle class. How was the middle class born in the United States? You know, that's something that's very specific to America, is the middle class. So if you're unsure about how did we develop a middle class here in the United States, your community is going to have to start there together, research it, see how wealth building actually happened and who it happened for. And then people then start to, after they build that awareness, they feel better about the social giving. Also being really clear with funders and saying, we're looking for funding that's going to be guaranteed for 3 years. I like to do the 3-year cycle for 3 years, and it's for this specific reason. There's a school here in Houston that has attained a couple funders that have said, we're going to fund you for 3 years because you have come to us, and it was so specific, and it's a proven model. So those are some ways that you can think of it. It can't be something that's a part of a yearly school budget because it's easy to chip away at it, right? It has to be something specific, set aside in another pot of money.
Sure. I know a couple other schools that I'm aware of that are for-profit schools, so they're not nonprofit. They don't have a 501c3 status. They've actually established a 501c3 specific for scholarships to their school. So it's a separate entity, but that's, you know, the income that comes in through that is set aside just for scholarships. So it's run by a committee, and you know, they have principles that they move through and move with. to make those decisions. I wonder though, you know, in that process to integrate a multi-year scholarship, how that could work. But that's such a good point, because I know so many of us struggle with that, you know, because you're really making those decisions based on the global perspective. But if you go through the steps that you've described here, it's easier to advocate for that 3-year scholarship or more.
It is. It is. And it's the same, you know, it's the same way when we advocate, when a family says, I taught Upper L, and so oftentimes there's that big question of, are they going to be with us their 6th year or not, right? In traditional middle school, if they are getting ready to transition, they want them to start 6th grade in traditional. And the same way we have to advocate with the families and say, please, they really need to finish out their full cycle with us. It's going to make all the difference. That we also have to advocate with our funders as well, making sure that we know that the families are staying. And again, if we're working with families, especially families that have hourly wage jobs. So these are families that it costs them more money than folks that have salaried wage jobs. It's going to cost them more money to take off work. Oftentimes they're not in control of their schedule. Oftentimes their schedule is given to them in a 2-week period or in a 30-day period, and hours might change. They're also the first ones that hours are going to be cut short for. So for them, paycheck to paycheck can always fluctuate depending on what's available for them. Many folks that work hourly wage jobs will have multiple hourly wage jobs or multiple incomes because, again, as I said before, you can work 40 hours hourly wage and it's still not enough to pay for a 2-bedroom apartment anywhere in the United States. So they're babysitters, they're cleaning houses, maybe they're doing tutoring online, right? They're having these multiple sources just to make ends meet. It's very different than salaried folks. I think of like a lot of educators, we have 2 jobs, we'll have a summer job, but oftentimes that's so that we can have additional disposable income. We'll have a second job so that we can go on that vacation, so we can buy a new MacBook, so that we can buy more baskets for our classroom, right? So we have a second job that's very different. It's fulfilling our needs, our gifts, our talents, and that we're getting compensated for. Kelly, I also want to mention in the chat box here, so some things we've done on our website in both language. So I love that. That's inclusive practice. So they're bilingual on their website. So that's letting people know, hey, we see you and we want you. Even if you're not creating an intentionally bilingual school, you can still have a bilingual website. If you have a Google website, you can have Google do translate. They can translate your website. This is back to Kelly, given presentations at the NAACP Education Committee. So they're thinking about where they're targeting. Where they're going. Maybe they're not going to go to the Tuesday morning moms meetup group in the neighborhood, but instead they're going to NAACP. You can also look at La Leche or La Voz Latina. You can look at community centers, other places where your target audience is spending their time. They've also gone to the Boys and Girls Club, Hispanic Cultural Center, and even private schools can become NSLP providers as well. Kelly, could you let me know what NSLP stands for? I have a feeling, but go ahead and let me know. I want to make sure. And she also said Early Learning Coalition Partnership allows you to give wraparound care. Oh, okay, it's National School Lunch Providers. So actually, I was thinking of something else. I'm glad that you clarified that. So if you're private school, let's say maybe you don't have a lunch program and everyone brings their lunch, you can become a part of the National School Lunch Providers, and it gives free or reduced lunch and breakfast. Here in Houston, it's actually through our school district that does that. So Houston ISD allows anyone to become part of the HISD lunch program. And so they actually go and deliver. And so you can get breakfast, lunch, and dinner through our school district, whether, like, even as a homeschooler, I could get this. And they deliver them to the libraries, community centers, or you can sign up and you can go and pick it up, or they'll deliver it to your school. So you can look at that. You can look at your local school district as a resource. Now, mind you, Houston is like the top 10 largest school districts, so they have some incredible services as well. These are all things to kind of start thinking about when we prepare our environment. How are we making sure it's being inclusive and welcoming to all? Okay, I'm gonna go to eliminating roadblocks for potential families. Kelly already mentioned one about the translation. We live in a really diverse time right now, and the United States has always been diverse, but the diversity representation is just increasing, especially by language. And so we may have families where the parents are not fluent in English, maybe they're emergent in English, or maybe they don't speak any English, but their children are definitely bilingual. And so making sure that you're having that translation not only on your website, but notes that go home, newsletters that go home. Make sure that you have on a welcoming survey in the beginning of the year. Ask, will you need a translator and in what language? Parent education night. If they need translation in Vietnamese, Mandarin, Spanish, you name it, see what resources are out there for you to make sure that you have a translator. Oftentimes we'll say the families didn't show up or they're not engaged. And it's really because we've missed the mark somewhere to help them be engaged. I know myself that if I moved to a country and English was not the dominant language, it's going to be really hard for me to sit through a parent ed in, let's say, Mandarin. And I have to keep going and I'm trying to read all of these notes. We do it the best we can, but how much more meaningful it would be if I had maybe not a verbal translator, but even if I had notes that I could follow along in English. I mean, talk about feeling welcome there.
And an opportunity to participate as well, because we definitely want to engage our parents in conversation. And if you have that piece, it can be reversed, where they're also participating and giving their thoughts and their experience, which of course is helping the whole group.
Yes. Not only can they come into the classroom and read a book in their home language, right, and help us translate things in their home language, like making sure you have the word welcome in everyone's home language represented in the classroom. You can make a welcome book with everyone's name and how they would say welcome or hello in their home language. You can create a poster, but also they can put parent education nights on too, like looking at our parents as experts. And how does education look in their community and their culture, their expectation of it as well. Many of our families just feel so grateful. I know I did, and my children went to public Montessori, so we didn't even pay tuition. And I felt every single day just such a sense of gratefulness that my child was selected in the lottery and that he was having this educational experience that I never had. And every day, as a parent, you just see the beauty that's happening. But at the same time, we always miss the mark. And so sometimes families don't feel comfortable with sharing their concerns or their feedback. And they do feel they fear retaliation. What if my child misbehaves and now the school's going to take away their scholarship fund? What if I say something that upsets them? What if I make a suggestion and I offend someone, and then next year, now maybe they're going to lower the cost? And there's stories of where this does happen. There's a Montessori school in Columbus, Ohio, and this happened. The mom who was on scholarship had spoke out, had some feedback for the school, and the school decided in that moment they were going to end funding for her child. And so there's a true and real fear for retaliation. So building that trust about not just saying we have an open door policy because this school said that we have an open door policy and that mom believed it. And so she said something, but what does an open door policy really look like? What are the channels of communication when you have a compliment and also when you have feedback? Do I make an appointment or can I just show up? Making sure they know that there's retaliation is not going to happen, that within your feedback, it just means that we have the opportunity to grow. Okay, I know that we're nearing the end here. And so I want to, on our next slide. Oh, and I guess I had one other one on the last one. You don't have to go back though. Invest in equity and anti-racist training for all. So before, again, preparing the environment, we hopefully, I'm going to say hopefully because sometimes it doesn't happen that way, but hopefully before we welcome our learners into the environment, all of our guides are trained in Montessori. Again, I know it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes it's simultaneously, sometimes it's the next year. Hiring happens late, but the idea is that we have a trained Montessorian in the environment ready to welcome our learners. The same has to happen when it comes to socioeconomic diversity, when it comes to racial and ethnic diversity. So invest in equity training, not just for your guides, but also think of parent education. You can have someone that comes in and does a parent education night, so everyone's getting on the same page before you welcome those learners in. We see it all of the time when someone isn't trained in Montessori and they're doing their best. And while they're doing their best, mistakes are happening, right? And so the way to minimize those mistakes is getting trained. A way to minimize the harm the same way is getting trained. So I have on this slide just some inclusive practices to think about. Start by asking these questions. Once you do welcome your families in, the diverse families you're trying to welcome in, start by asking these questions every time you're meeting. Don't forget when you meet on their terms. What works for them? Again, especially if they're hourly, they're going to be punished for taking work off. So maybe you have to meet during the day, after school. Maybe you have to meet at a Starbucks near their job because they don't have enough transition time between their second job. But think about and ask them, is the school a convenient place? Is the time a convenient? And then inside your prepared environment, I had some things that you can think about doing. I just want to highlight, think about the ongoing cost for families. It's the field trip fees, it's the uniform, it's the, can you bring snacks? Can you donate this? All of that. Always just be really mindful of the ongoing fees. And then on our next slide here, I have some time if anybody wants to share out just like a quick 60 seconds, maybe something throughout how you felt. Maybe you would like to be really, really vulnerable with us and share a way that you faltered. Like, oh, this is something that I realized I've had a misstep and I want to create action around it. Building that awareness allows us to really analyze and move forward. Or maybe it's something that you found during the webinar today. Oh, I found this out and I didn't realize it. If you want to go ahead and share that in the chat box, that would be wonderful. So while you're sharing that, on the next slide, I do have some moving forward ideas for y'all. But moving forward, when you're ready, choose 3 actionable and tangible steps that you can commit to when you return to your campus. For some, it's going to be establishing an investment or financial committee. For others, maybe it's going to be allocate funding to hire someone to support us in this work. That might be myself. You can hire me to support you in the work, or it might be someone who's even closer to you regionally. If you're not for sure who that is, email me and I can get you in contact with the right folks. We will specifically fundraise for scholarships. We'll create an accountability partner structure for peer coaching around investment practices. And that can happen here within the NITO community. Y'all could do peer coaching with each other. It sounds like Kelly's already on the right track. So you have someone ready to go in your community that's really ready to work with y'all. Setting up a meeting with your guides and families to demand a school-wide commitment to this work, again, before you begin, or setting up a meeting with your educational training center. Like I said, I went to 2 different Montessori centers. I wasn't trained in this. I have a degree in elementary education. I wasn't trained in this. But we can begin that training now. So for the next generation. So these are just some ideas. I'm sure you have some incredible ideas and you can share them in the chat box too. And then last but not least,
go.
Okay. So when I see that Jennifer said, I feel anxious when I think about breaking some family's bubble in a very affluent and often white crowd. Oh my gosh, Jennifer, you're right. And your anxiety is well deserved. And that's why it's important even to bring in a third person, a third party. Kelly said ditto. That's not you, but bringing in an equity trainer and starting from a historical context about how did we get here? Because so often we just don't know. We don't know how we get here. And if you think about it, most of us can't name our ancestors just 2 to 3 generations before us. So we really don't know what happened 2 to 3 generations before us. We can name our grandparents. For some of us, we can name our great-grandparents, but most of us can't name our great-great-grandparents. And so starting just with a historical context, how did we get here in Dallas, looking at the history of segregation, looking at the history of housing discrimination. A lot of folks have built their wealth in the United States off of their home equity. And so through redlining, you can get a common language and then slowly but surely start to move forward. And everyone has to know that it benefits all. So often this conversation looks like it's only going to benefit poor folks, or it's only going to benefit Black learners, or it's only going to benefit substitute the marginalized identity. And so when you start having the conversation saying that, no, it's going to benefit your child's creativity, leadership skills, and so on, we can all see that we're in this together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Oh, Britt, this has been so lovely to have you present on this. And I know we're just scratching the surface, because this is such a important topic. And I know a topic that many of us think about. We just don't know where to go or where to start and how to implement. So this is a very practical webinar for people to revisit, take a look. I'll definitely make sure that we share the slides so that you can go back into it. I took a couple notes too of the organizations you mentioned. And Britt, if you've got any other resources to share, I'm happy to include it in our members section along with this video so that people can reference it as they do this really important work.
Yes, I'll have a handout for y'all, and it's going to have not only the sources that I used for my research, but it's going to have a language part, like as you were saying in the very beginning, that precision of language is so important. And so have some most current terms that humanizes everyone that we're talking about too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I love, we've got such a good group here too, and a very active group, which I appreciate. I wonder if we could do some type of focus group where we get together and we work on this, and have these next steps, and even create a plan that could be replicated for other schools. Because again, this is where I think we lose traction, is we just don't know where to go and where to start. Similar to marketing, I'm experiencing this as I'm here. It's like, we're Montessorians, we're not marketers, but we have to market because that's how we, need to make sure we're translating and reaching those families that don't otherwise know about us. And this is very similar, in that process where we just don't know how to start. So I'd love it for those of you that are on the call. If you're interested in doing a focus group, I'd love to be a part of that. I'm not in a school right now, but of course, I studied sociology, and this is the reason I got into Montessori anyway. So I'm just like, this stuff, I could do this all day long. But yeah, Britt, would you be interested in being a part of that group as well? We'd love to have you.
Yes, no, and I would love to develop a framework, something that we could make accessible to all, and really help map it out, and people can get just the big pillars out of the way, and then they can make things fit their community. So that's great. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you again, Britt, for your time. Thank you to those that have attended. So the recording is going to be live in our members section probably in the next day or so, but we so appreciate you here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. And thank you, Jennifer. Big shout out to Jennifer for even recommending me and getting me connected with the Nido marketing family. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Kelly said she'd be happy to participate. So we've got some good people here. Awesome. All right. Well, Britt, enjoy the rest of your day. Everybody else, enjoy your day. And we will see you next week.
Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Bye.